So God invites us to take part in His grand story, His story to bring the whole world to Himself. So when we first arrived to New Guinea, we were excited. We couldn't wait to bring the message of the gospel to a tribal group. The Lord directed us to the Hewa tribe.
And I can remember that first day. I think I cried the whole day. I was so excited, but I was also very apprehensive.
We moved into Hewa to start learning their language and culture, and we moved in with Jonathan and Susan Koff.
I was doing my laundry, and this sweet young teenage lady got up, and she grabbed the pile of clothes that I had just washed, and she came over and she dumped them in the dirt and picked them up one by one and hung them up with me. And that gave me so much joy, because what she was communicating to me is, I want to be your friend. I want to get to know you. I don't know why you're doing what you're doing, but I want to be your friend.
So the Lord provided friends for us, language helpers. Giannis and Ayaka took about 4 years to learn their language to the level where we could start translating the Bible for the first time. We were looking for key terms, for words that we could use. The idea of love, the fact that God loved people and wanted to draw them to Himself. It just dawned on me one day, there's no word for love. There's no way for me to say to my wife, I love you. There's no way for me to say to my children, I love you. In their language, they don't do that. They don't say that. And so as I was looking for a way to describe this key word that we're going to need, especially when we get to translating John 3:16, God loved the world so much. As I was talking with my helper, Yanis, I saw that there was a woman that she was holding her baby, and she had such a look of care for her baby. She was nursing it, holding it as close as possible, and I said, what is that? She's looking at her baby, and there's obviously some connection there. The ladies do that with their babies. That's no big deal. That's Yanafdu Mofo. And I said, what is Yanafdu Mofo? And he said, well, it's putting your heart. She's putting her heart on her baby. And I thought, well, maybe the Lord has given us the word for love there. So does your father put his heart on you? And he laughed and said, no, fathers don't put their hearts on their son. And I said, well, God, this God that we're going to tell you about, He made people and He cares about them, and so He put His heart on them. And he said, no, you can't say that. There is no spirit that has ever put their heart on a person. In their perspective, in their way of looking at things, yes, in the spirit world, they're always trying to harmonize the spirits. They're appeasing spirits. They're manipulating spirits, trying to get the spirits to do what they want, but they've never heard of this concept of a spirit actually loving a person. But I decided, okay, we're going to try it anyway. We went for it. God has decided to put His heart on us and decided not to take it back. And Yanis was helping me learn the language, and then when we got the language well enough, then Yanis and Ayaka, they started helping me with translating. We were translating the first verses of the Bible, Genesis. And we're working through getting ready, getting enough verses translated so that we'd be able to present the gospel story. And I remember I would talk to the boys and say, get ready, make sure you're here, make sure everything is, you don't have any distractions, because we're just about to teach the most important message you have ever heard. You've never heard a story like this. You need to come and hear it. So Finebot was part of the group that seemed agreeable. It seemed like everything was going fine until we made that announcement the day we were going to start teaching. Then I heard through the grapevine that the local witch doctor, one of the many witch doctors, had made a similar announcement. He said, okay, everybody, all the young men of the village, June 12, I want you all to come help me. We're going to build a huge house. And I'm going to start teaching the ways of the ancestors, the ways of appeasing spirits. And so I want all the young men to come help me build my big house. So I went and talked to the witch doctor, and he was saying, well, this is a new story. Yes, it's our ancestral story, but we are building a fence. We're building this huge fence that's going to protect all of us. He's talking about a spiritual fence to keep all evil spirits away outside of Hewa territory. No one will ever die again. No one will ever die again. He's talking about eternal life here. He said enemies won't be able to attack us and have any advantage over us again. He said our gardens will always grow good. There won't be droughts. There won't be problems. We will always have game in our traps. and we'll always have plenty of food when the boys go hunting. So I talked some more with him that night, and that night I just prayed, and I thought, in the morning when I get up and I head back to Hewa, to the village where we had built our houses and we're going to present the Bible, I prayed, I said, God, that these young men that are right here in this big house right here, these young men like Feinbot, God, that you would just make them hungry for your word, that they'd want to hear it, and that they'd come with me and Micah as we go back to our village.
I gardened with them. I had gardens. I took care of animals. I tried to do all the things that would make me a good Hewa lady. But it just seemed like the connection wasn't there. This lady from out of another village had arrived. She gave birth to a little girl. She died within minutes after birth. And her little baby was left hanging in a string bag in the house. And as I arrived, they were tearing the house down with their grief. And I ran and got the little baby from inside and brought her home. She was so tiny, very premature. I tried to feed her with a bottle, but she was just too little. So I put a tube in her nose and fed her through that into her stomach. And we named her JC. And Jonathan said, Susan, little JC might not have a lot of time with us, so you just spend all your time loving her. Kids and I will do the cleaning, the cooking, and so that's what I did. And the Lord gave us 6 weeks with little JC. She slept between us in the night, and during the day I would carry her around, and the people saw how much I loved her. One day when she was 6 weeks old, JC died in my arms. Her heart just gave out, and that was probably one of the saddest times of my life. My heart was just broken. But when I carried my little baby JC outside and told the people what had happened, the whole village began wailing for little JC, but really they were wailing with me, knowing how sad I was. And that was the first time we had a connection, because you see, all the ladies in Hewa back then had lost a baby before, so they now had something they could relate with me about. And it was so exciting because it was right before the presentation of the gospel. It was neat to see how the Lord used that little life for his purposes.
I met with Keith and we prayed about it, and we decided, you know what, let's go ahead and start teaching and hope that God will bring the young men back from the village so they'll hear the word of God. So we started teaching in June and taught through July, August, September. It wasn't until October, got toward the end there, wrapped it all up, taught the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Feinbot hadn't come to any of it, not any of it. Some people had listened, and it looked like some people were trusting in Jesus. Later, things went into a meltdown there in that village.
I heard back in Hewa someone hacked Thomas to death. He has been chopped to death, and all the men at Hewa have gone crazy.
I went down and held my friend who had been killed, and his blood got on my hands, and I just cried to God, what is this all about?
So I hiked there to see. I was trying to find my Uncle Vos, as he also was being hunted to be killed. I found him right in the middle of the village with Michael. Lots of men with guns had come searching for them and were closing in on my uncle. One of the men jammed his gun into his chest and pulled the trigger, but it didn't go off. They yelled, "You and your relatives get out of here now."
After somebody got sick, after somebody died, they would sit around in the evenings when we weren't there, but they would decide who was guilty, who had the evil spirit that was causing sickness and death. And then they formed raiding parties and went and killed one young man, and later more. And it just tore at our hearts. We're here to save lives. We're here to give them the most awesome message they could ever hear.
Since Thomas had been killed, all of Vos's relatives had to leave. And with that, they left.
That murder in our yard put the village in war. We were not able to live there anymore. I had to take my family, wife and kids out of the village. Keith also couldn't live there with his family. We had to live in town. I wanted to do what I could to reach these people. We had told them the gospel message, but didn't know how to live there because it wasn't safe anymore. There was continual talk of retaliation, and we didn't know what to do, but we prayed, God that you would find a place for us to live.
The man Jonathan and Yanis came to Aesop. They were hiking from Hewa all the way to Kulufundu. I asked Yanis, "Why are you doing this difficult hike?" We are going to see the people of Kulufundu. Alimbu and Fato told us they were hungry for God's words, so we are going to see what it's like there.
So we made the 2-day hike, and oh man, the scenario was completely different.
The villagers were low on food and very hungry. Alimbu, Fato, and Samuel were almost too hungry to eat. Alimbu showed Jonathan where he would sleep in the entryway of his new house.
The patriarch of the village, an old man, and his son Fato, and the others there welcomed us and said, "We want you to teach us. We want you to teach us right away. Don't wait. And don't bring any of that rice. Don't bring anything else with you, because we don't want enemies to see that and follow you here. We don't want people coming here for any other reason but to hear the gospel."
Later in 2008, I heard that they were starting a school to teach people how to read and write there in Kulufundu.
When Jonathan arrived back after teaching literacy with Yanis in Kulufundu, and I heard that Fato was going to build me a house, I was really excited. It would be my first time living in a bush house with a fire pit, but I was excited to relocate to the Kulufundu village and get to know these new people and learn their new dialect. Well, when I arrived to Kulufundu, I was so nervous because the helicopter brought me in first, and so Jonathan wasn't even there, and I had never seen these people before. And they were so excited. They were planning a big party for me for my arrival. So they had gone hunting, and about 5 little boys had a python or a boa constrictor, I don't know, but it was like 15 feet long. So it was across the shoulders of like all these young boys, and they were so proud. They were so excited to show me. And I hope I smiled through it, but I wasn't super excited. And then they took me to my new home, and it was beautiful.
So the scenario in Kulufundu was completely different than Fiawana. For example, the witch doctor in Fiawana had pulled everyone away from the teaching of the Word of God. But in Kulufundu it was the opposite. Alimbu, the patriarch of the village, was the shaman or the witch doctor figure, and his son Fato was the trainee. They were both working at it together, but they said, absolutely not. We want to hear this message. We want to hear what you have to say, so please teach us. And that was beautiful. And we were living in our home. We started teaching creation through Christ. But instead of teaching once a day, like we had done in Fiawana, the villagers said to us, no, we really want to hear this, and we want to hear it as fast as you can give it to us. So we don't want to just hear it once a day. We want you to teach us 7 days a week, twice a day. 2 times a day, 7 days a week. And we said, okay, we're going to give it a shot. Maybe we'll take Sunday off. I don't know what we'll do, but we decided to get started. Right after we had taught the law, before we got into the life of Jesus, Feinbot showed up.
I saw what was happening, and even though I hadn't attended many classes, I started trying to learn to read. Yanis helped me with the first lesson book. I caught on to reading the syllables, and I was quickly able to read the first book, then the second, and the third book. But Susan and Yanis were in shock that I had learned to read so quickly. They said, if that's the case, then you are ready to read God's book.
He started attending our teaching sessions there. He caught up with the others. He hadn't attended the literacy class, but he caught up with everybody else. Just self-taught, and had Yanis help him and some of the other boys help him. Learned how to read and write by the time of the first graduation class.
That's when I started to think back on my life. It dawned on me, God must have caused it to happen so that I could learn to read so fast. That's when I reversed my thinking and decided not to return to Aesop and started coming to hear the teaching. I listened day after day until Jonathan reached the death of Jesus and how he returned to life. And then he taught the Creation to Christ course a second time. When he got to teaching how Jesus died on the cross, he had Ken up on the cross acting out how Jesus died. I was very surprised and overcome by what I was seeing. It's true that he was killed. I saw it and it left me in shock. Jesus had been thinking of all the bad practices I had been living in the past, all the wrong things I was doing now, and even the bad things I will do in the future. And in order to pay for those things, he suffered much pain. I realized that if I didn't turn away from my sins to trust in Jesus, later he would say to me, I suffered much pain while dying for your debt of sins, so why didn't you trust in my payment? And God would say to me, I gave my only son to die to pay your debt of sins. I looked into the future to this time and did that for you. So why didn't you think of all those sins? I realized he would send me to the place of fire as punishment.
And he understood, he was one of the very first people that understood that Jesus died for a reason, to pay for the sin debt of all people. And he got it.
At that very time, I was born again to become one of God's children.
And he says, I want to follow his trail. I was so excited, so pleased. Him and these other guys, Fado and Alimbu and Michael, and they were just so excited to hear this message, to understand it. And they said to me, Jonathan, you can't leave. You've told us the beginning of the story. You've told us it's like building a house. You've driven poles into the ground to build this big house, but we need to hear the whole story. So you can't leave. Don't go anywhere else. Stay here and teach us. And I asked Feinbach, I said, what are you thinking? Are you going to be here? And he said, yes, I'm not going anywhere. I need to hear the rest of the story.
I had a new chance. God caused it to happen so that I could live at Kulufundu and become one of God's children. I hadn't gone to school to learn to read and write, but God caused it to happen so that I could hear about the death of Jesus for my sins. God worked inside my heart and I became a son of God. I am so very happy that happened, and I just kept living there. I just listened as Jonathan taught God's words.
So then we continued teaching all of Acts, the story of the early believers, into Romans, foundational truths of the Bible, about halfway through Ephesians, and that's where Keith came in and helped teach Ephesians.
All these ideas were new to me, but I started telling others about God's words in His book and Jesus, the only thing of significance.
So after the main teaching in 2009, Jonathan and I went back to America to adopt our last child, McKenna, which was such a joy. Well, we ended up being gone for 2 years, and in those 2 years, Yanis had gotten married, and they had a little boy, and this little boy had died. And Alimbu, the patriarch of the village, his wife had also died.
While we were gone, Feinbach and Yanis and these other guys, Gibson and Michael, they all got together and they started praying and considering the people that lived in the witch doctor's village of Asop. And so as they were praying about it, they felt like the most natural person to go back to Asop and teach the Bible to the witch doctor's village was Feinbach. By that time, the village had migrated from that original garden area to another garden area that they were calling Pasife.
I went to Pasife carrying a box with all the books for teaching them how to read and write. They had built a roof shelter to use for our teaching house, so I hung the blackboard there and started teaching. Everyone was coming to school, and by the end, there were about 20 men and women who had learned to read and write very well. Then we started teaching Genesis. Yanis came to help me start and was there for about a week before he returned to Kulufundu. While I stayed there teaching, nothing bad happened at all. Everything went well. I continued teaching until the first Creation Through Christ course was finished. Then I went back to teach through it again for the second course until it was finished. Then I showed the illustration of how Jesus died on a cross. The people saw the skit and all of them started crying and wailing and asking, "So now what should we do?" Then I started checking to see what they understood, and I realized that some of them understood the significance of what Jesus did on the cross, but others did not. But they really wanted to get baptized, and I was not sure what to do.
Like, God, you have done something beautiful here. You took somebody out of the witch doctor's training, turned him around and sent him back into the witch doctor's training, and some of those very people have repented and turned to you.
Jonathan had returned, so Yanis and a few others who were ready to be baptized from Kulufundu came over for the baptism.
But we got to watch as Feinbach and Yanis baptized Feinbach's uncle that raised him, Yanis's dad, right there in that village, baptized their own father and uncle. And what a joy, what a joy.
They had come up with a new plan. They wanted to build an airstrip to get books and paper and pencils and medicines and soap because the helicopter cost too much money. Later, I heard that they had found a suitable place down at Yifki.
Eventually, when we decided to move here to an area that they called Yifki to build a village and an airstrip, Feinbach came with us. He was eager to help us. So he was one of the young men that supported us in building the airstrip, building our houses, and he built a house here. And he was so eager to take in more of the teaching that he didn't want to go back to Pacific because he felt he might miss something. So as we were teaching 1 Corinthians and Timothy and Philippians and these other books, as we kept teaching the Bible, he has been part of this village, absorbing it, taking it in the entire time.
We were a small group with very few men, so we divided up the airstrip, assigning 5 men to clear the top, 5 to clear the bottom, and 5 to clear the center, assigning all the boys to help. First we cleared out all the underbrush, then dug out the root balls of all the trees until they fell over. Jonathan was cutting logs with the chainsaw, and he worked hard to teach us how to use the saw. So Fato, Yanis, Ken and I cut up all the logs and everyone worked to burn all the logs, branches and roots. Then a tractor came and Jonathan and John Michael started leveling the ground. We were working very hard, but there were no broken bones or accidents that caused death. I saw that and thought, God is powerful. The entire airstrip was done very quickly. Jonathan and John Michael worked hard and it was very quickly leveled. We were so happy and we said big prayers of thanksgiving. God, we have seen your very big strength. And all the people were thankful and saying thank you to God. We had started the work in late 2011 and an airplane landed August 2013.
Samaritan's Purse came in with a team of doctors and Matthew Gallman from Kujip Hospital. And they came in to teach our ladies, and actually the whole village, about childbirth. They did a wonderful presentation. The whole village listened. And from that, I took 3 ladies and continued to teach them. We flew to Kujip Hospital, where Matthew Gallman continued to educate our ladies on midwifery. So we now have 3 ladies that are completely independent on delivering babies.
It was really important for Susan to be involved in the women with the women and bring them into this role as midwives, to save lives, and it also helped them become more engaged in the Word of God and quicker at learning new ideas, learning new concepts from the Word of God. It was just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was exciting to see the ladies excited about learning. John Michael George and Jessie George arrived to Yifki as our new co-workers. It was an exciting time because we had our little girl that was 3 years old now, McKenna, with us. And the Georges have 3 little girls about the same age as McKenna. So it was such a blessing to see the Lord even providing friendships for us, but also friendships for our little McKenna in the tribe. So those were some exciting times.
And when I taught the book of Timothy, I really wanted to try to start this passing of the baton to help the ones that God has excited for him, impassioned for him, to help those guys take the baton and be able to teach the Bible. So I started having them teach lessons. Instead of me teaching the church, we decided it was important to teach the teachers first and then let them teach in the church.
The three girls right here are doing basic English, very beginning, just learning their vowels and their consonants, their short vowels and long sounds, very basic. These two boys are still doing the national language, which is Tokpitin. They've already graduated from Hewa literacy, so now they're just learning their national language, learning to read and write. And these two boys are my advanced students. They will soon be going away to school because we do not have a real official school here in Hewa, and they are doing more advanced English right now. And they're doing a really nice job.
As a Bible teacher living out here in the bush, a Bible teacher, a translator living out here in the jungle, we're way isolated, separated from stores. We can't get out to buy our own supplies. We can't do government work at all, government paperwork or anything that we need to do. So we're dependent on a team. We're very grateful for supply buyers, that is people who will live in town and buy supplies for us, and then for pilots who will handle it, package it, put it on an airplane, bring it here for us. We're just extremely grateful.
Because we didn't have any way to get those things ourselves, and so when we opened those things up and we saw that, man, flour's there, or the eggs were there and not broken because they had packed them well.
So right now we're translating the New Testament. I'm about halfway done, still quite a bit left to do, but in the process, the whole point of translating the Bible is to be able to teach it and to disciple the believers the Lord has given us. So in this discipleship process, we're able to bring some of these people up to the point where they're able to take care of themselves spiritually. Right now there's 6 young men that it's obvious the Lord's been raising them up to be the shepherds of this flock right here. So right now my main ministry, aside from translating, is to bring these 6 guys to the place where they're ready to be ordained as elders of the Hewa church.
About 5:30 in the morning, it was before the sun had come up, I heard somebody outside my house, and they were walking around and they were kind of muttering and mumbling, and I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I walked out and there was this gentleman named Feinbot. I walked up to him and I said, "Feinbot, what are you doing? What's going on?" He said, "Every morning I get up and I walk through the village and I walk around each house and I pray for each individual within that house. I pray for their safety, for their health, but most of all, I pray for their spiritual understanding and for their spiritual growth." And he's like, "I even walked around your house this morning, was praying for you." And here is this young man hungry to serve in his community, hungry to pray for his community, hungry to see not only physically okay, but most importantly, spiritually okay. And that is one of the reasons it was an easy question. Does he meet the qualifications of an elder? And as we look through that list, you could see Feinbot definitely has a heart and a care for the sheep in Hewa.
Feinbot was one of those guys, one of the sharpest, one of the most discerning, one of the most apt to teach, able to teach. And one who had kept himself pure so that he could serve God. Feinbot is one of those guys. He's a hero of faith here. So as we've been living with the Hewa, I've got some young men that have helped me translate the Bible. But as we translate the Bible, I need at least 3 guys to go through every single verse to make sure I'm saying it as clear as possible in their language. So Feinbot is one of those guys that helps us in the consultant review process. It's an exciting story. It's unfolding as we speak. It just it's opening up. It's a beautiful story that God has invited us to participate in. And I am so proud to be a friend of Feinbot because I see God has worked powerfully in his heart and using him to bring the gospel message to other villages inside the Hewa language area.
One of the bittersweet parts of the work is you work so hard, you pour so much into it, but you're doing all that to work yourself out of a job. The Hewa or whatever group you work with, they'll always be able to reach their people better than an outsider can. They know the culture, the language, the ins and outs. They know it all better than we ever will. And so, it's time to put it into their hands. We have strong church leaders, and it's time to let them stand on their own 2 feet.
So we taught through 1 Timothy and felt like, okay, these guys are getting the idea of I'm passing the baton to them, but it's not to end there. They need to pass the baton also, be in the process of passing a baton. So we moved into teaching other books, taught through the book of Revelation recently, and that was exciting. It was like a huge milestone to teach the end of the story. One of the subjects that we really wanted to nail down, especially with these new people in our village, for sure that they know that they're saved, they're trusting in Jesus to pay their sin debt, but to be able to articulate it, to be able to say, this is what I believe, this is how I came to faith. Of course, our 6 main teachers gave their testimonies, and then the teacher trainees, they gave their testimonies, and then we started going on with other people having the opportunity to give their testimonies. And we said, you know what, it's been a long time since we've had a baptism, and our daughter McKenna is ready to get baptized. She's to that place in her faith. So as we were working toward it, having them articulate their faith, and on the day of our baptism, there was 49 people, including our daughter McKenna, 49 people who publicly, in front of everybody, said, I am a follower of Jesus. I trust him to pay for my sin, and I want to follow him. It's beautiful, beautiful days.
And it makes me think back to all the many years I've had with them. It's going to be very, very difficult to leave. These people are like family to me. I'm closer to them than I am with a lot of people in America. So it's going to be a very hard move. At the same time, we've been preparing for this for 20 years. From the very beginning with medical, we actually trained a number of people in Hewa to work alongside us. So we weren't doing anything completely alone. But every time we did something, we would have them with us so they could see how to do it. So after 20 years, now our medical is independent. Our literacy for their language is completely independent. They can read and write, and they can teach others to read and write. And those were some of the goals that we had. And my biggest goal was that our midwife program would be independent, that I wouldn't have to deliver babies anymore. So that was the whole goal for me, was the medical side and the teaching side, that they would be completely independent. So we're here. It's time for us to just step away a little bit. Very, very hard to leave these people that I love so very much.
Yes, we've done everything we can to disciple this group, and yes, they're going to succeed after our departure. They're going to continue to teach themselves and bring themselves along to the day when Jesus Christ comes back. Oh, what a day that'll be.